The sky above Caith Prime had not known war for 3,000 years. The Valoran Compact had seen to that 6 alien species, bound together by trade and treaty, had built something rare in the galaxy, a lasting peace. Their cities rose in graceful towers of pale stone and living crystal. Their ships moved through the stars like silver fish through calm water. They had art, science, philosophy, and centuries of quiet prosperity behind them. They believed, with the deep certainty of those who have never been truly tested, that the worst days were behind them. They were wrong. The Drakari came from beyond the galactic rim, from a region of space that the compact star charts marked only as empty. No one knew how long they had been building their fleets out there in the dark. No one had fought to look. The first warning was a wave of gravitational distortion that rippled across Caith Prime's orbital sensor grid. And by the time the alarm sounded, the sky was already full of enemy ships. There were hundreds of them, Drakari. Warships were massive, angular things, black-holed and covered in jagged armor, plates that made them look like the teeth of some enormous predator. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a wide arc around the planet, filling every approach vector, cutting off every escape route. Their weapons opened fire before the Valoran defense fleet had even finished powering up its shields. Commander Aleth Jean stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Sarah Vaughn, and watched the destruction begin. She was tall, even by Valoran standards, with pale blue skin and narrow silver eyes that had seen 40 years of service. She had commanded fleets in patrol actions and border disputes and the occasional pirate suppression. She had never commanded a fleet in a real war. None of them had. The orbital defense grid lasted 18 minutes. The automated platforms fired their weapons bravely enough, but they had been designed to stop smugglers and small raiding parties, not a full invasion armada. The Drakari burned through them like fire. Through dry grass, debris rained down on the planet below, streaking across the sky in long lines of orange and white. Alth gave the order to engage. Her ships moved forward, elegant sweepwing cruisers with gleaming hulls and precise formation patterns. They fired their energy lances in coordinated volleys, just as the tactical manuals prescribed. The Drakari absorbed the hits, shrugged them off, and returned fire with weapons that tore through Valoran shields like they were made of paper. In the first hour, Eighth lost 12 ships. In the second hour, she lost 20 more. The Drakari didn't just fight, they overwhelmed. Their tactics were brutal and simple. They closed distance fast, hit hard, and moved on to the next target before the wreckage had even stopped glowing. There was no elegance to it, no refinement, just raw, crushing force. By the third hour, Eighth made the hardest decision of her life. She ordered a general retreat. Nearly 60% of the compact's combined navy was gone, destroyed, disabled, or drifting without power. The rest limped away toward the outer system, engines straining, hulls scorched and broken. The Sarah Vaughn itself had taken heavy damage. Its port side was torn open, and 3 of its 12 decks were exposed to vacuum on the surface of Caith Prime. The panic was immediate and total. Millions of Valorans looked up at the burning sky and understood that everything they had known was ending. Refugee ships launched from every spaceport, desperate to escape before the Drakari turned their guns on the ground. Many did not. In the capital city of Ath, deep beneath the high council chamber, the leaders of the compact gathered around a long table, carved from a single piece of crystal. The room was old, older than the compact itself, and its walls were lined with the names of every counselor who had ever served. It was a place of wisdom and tradition. Now it felt like a tomb. Counselor Dorrit sat at the head of the table. He was the eldest among them. His blue skin faded to a soft gray with age. His hands thin and steady. He had served on the council for longer than most of his colleagues had been alive. He had guided the compact through trade disputes, resource shortages, and diplomatic crisis, but this was something else entirely. He looked around the table at the faces of his fellow counselors. He saw fear. He saw the blank, stunned expression of people who had never imagined that something like this could happen to them. The outcome of this war, Dorrit said quietly, is already sealed. No one argued. The numbers were too clear. The Drakari had more ships, more soldiers, and more weapons than the compact could hope to match. The Valorans were not a warrior people. They had not fought a major war in over 1,000 years. Their military was a peacekeeping force, not a war machine. They did not have the training, the doctrine, or the mindset to survive what was coming. We must negotiate, said one counselor. Sue for terms perhaps they will accept. Tribute, they have not responded to any communication, said another. They do not seem interested in talking. At the far end of the table, a young diplomat named Sorvan sat in silence. He was junior, too junior really to be in this room at all. He had been brought in to take notes, but he had been listening carefully, and something had been turning over in his mind. There is another option, he said. The room turned to look at him. Dorrit raised one thin eyebrow. The humans, Sorvan said. For a moment there was silence. Then, slowly, one of the counselors began to laugh. Others joined in. It was not a cruel laugh exactly. It was the laugh of people who needed to find something absurd in a moment of despair. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans. They were a young species from a small, unremarkable planet in a quiet arm of the Milky Way. They lived short lives, barely a century if they were lucky. They had only achieved faster than light travel within the last 200 years, and they spent most of their brief history doing what they seemed to do best, fighting each other, war after war, stretching back to the very beginning of their civilization. They were considered chaotic, emotional, stubborn, and reckless. Interesting to study perhaps, but certainly not a serious military power. The humans cannot help us, Dorrit said gently. They are too few, too primitive, and too far away. This war will be over before they could even arrive. Sorvan nodded slowly, accepting the judgment, but later that night, alone in his small office with the sound of distant explosions rumbling through the walls, he sat down at his communication terminal. His hands trembled slightly as he typed. He composed the distress signal. It was simple and direct. A description of the attack, a request for help, and the coordinates of Cavath Prime. He aimed it at the only human colonial frequency he had on file and sent it into the dark. He did not know if anyone would hear it. He did not know if anyone would care. But he sent it anyway because he was not yet ready to believe that the outcome was truly sealed. The signal raced across the stars at the speed of light, and Sorvan sat back in his chair and waited for a reply that might never Come, the signal reached New Raleigh on a Tuesday. New Raleigh was not a glamorous place, it was a frontier colony on the edge of human-controlled space, a dusty world of red plains and low gray mountains, home to about 400,000 settlers, a small naval outpost, and a communications relay station that mostly handled cargo route traffic and weather reports. It was the kind of place where nothing important ever happened. Lieutenant Commander Danny Cortez was sitting in the relay station's monitoring room when the signal came through. He was 34 years old, lean and dark-haired, with a kind of quiet, watchful face that didn't give away much. He had been a Marine for 12 years and had served on 3 different frontier colonies, and he had learned a long time ago that the interesting things in life usually arrived without warning. The signal was messy, distorted by distance and interference, but the translation software pulled out enough to make the meaning clear. An alien civilization was under attack. Their fleet was destroyed. Their world was burning. They were asking for help. Danny read it twice, then a third time, and he picked up a secure line and called his commanding officer. Colonel Vicky Hale was in her office on the other side of the base reviewing supply reports. She was in her late 40s, broad-shouldered and sharp-featured, with short gray streaked hair and a voice that could cut through a crowded room like a blade. She had fought in 2 border conflicts and a pirate war, and she had a reputation in the Corps for being the kind of officer who made decisions fast and never looked back. She listened to Danny and LT Unc and GT Y's report without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. "Play me the signal," she said. Danny played it, the alien voice, Sorvan's voice, though they didn't know his name yet, filled the room. It was calm but strained, the words careful and precise, the fear underneath them unmistakable. Vicky leaned back in her chair. "How far is Cave Prime from here?" "About 11 days. At maximum jump speed," Danny said. "And the enemy force, from what the signal describes, it's big, hundreds of capital ships, ground forces, the whole package. This isn't a raid, it's a full-scale invasion." Vicky nodded slowly. She didn't ask whether they should get involved. She asked what it would take. Within 6 hours, the signal and Vicky's assessment had been pushed up through 3 levels of command to Earth's Central Command on Mars. Within 12 hours, a secure conference was underway between the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, and the Colonial Affairs Committee. Within 48 hours, a decision had been made. Operation Long Reach was authorized. The task force was not large by galactic standards: 4 cruisers, 2 carrier groups, a Marine expeditionary brigade, and a fleet of support vessels carrying fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, and enough rations to feed 10,000 soldiers for 6 months. It was everything the frontier could spare on short notice, pulled together from 3 different colonial sectors and assembled at a staging point in deep space. Aboard the carrier Gallant Ridge, Captain Nate Sheridan stood before his crew in the main hangar bay and told them the truth. Nate was 41, tall and rangy, with a calm, almost lazy manner that hid a sharp and restless mind. He had commanded the Gallant Ridge for 3 years and had earned his crew's trust the hard way by being honest with them even when the truth was uncomfortable. "Here's what we know," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hangar. "An alien coalition called The Valoran Compact is being invaded by a hostile force called the Drakari. Dominion, the Compact's fleet has been largely destroyed. Their home world is under siege. They sent a distress signal, and we picked it up. He paused and looked out at the faces of his crew. Young faces, pilots, engineers, marines, medics. Some of them had never seen real combat. We are going to help them, he continued. I won't pretend I know exactly what we're flying into. Enemy has us outnumbered badly. We've never fought the Drakari before, and we don't know their tactics. The Valorans didn't even officially ask for us. One junior diplomat sent that signal on his own without authorization. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Nate let it pass, but here's what I do know. Somewhere out there, people are dying. Civilians are running, and there's nowhere left to run. A whole civilization is watching its world burn, and we have the ability to do something about it. He let that sit for a moment. Earth doesn't wait for engraved invitations when people are dying. That's not who we are. That's never been who we are. The hangar was quiet. Then, someone in the back, no one ever figured out who, started clapping. It spread quickly, and within seconds, the entire hangar was filled with the sound. 3 decks below, in the cramped quarters of 2nd Platoon, Sergeant Laura Beckett was having a different kind of conversation. Laura was 30, red hair, and freckled, with strong hands and a way of looking at people that made them feel like she could see right through them. She had grown up in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains and had joined the Marines at 18 because she wanted to see the stars. She had seen them. She had also seen the worst things that people could do to each other in the dark spaces between those stars, and she had come out the other side with her sense of humor mostly intact. Her platoon was gathered around her in a loose circle. They were young. Most of them were in their early 20s, and they were nervous. She could see it in the way they fidgeted with their gear and avoided eye contact. All right, listen up. I know you've heard the briefing. Big scary aliens. Big scary fleet. Long odds I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's going to be easy, because it's not. She looked around at them, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. But I will tell you this, every single one of you signed up for a reason. Maybe it was because you wanted adventure. Maybe it was because you wanted to prove something. Maybe it was because you didn't have anywhere else to go. Doesn't matter. What matters is that right now, today, there are people out there who need someone to stand between them and the dark, and we're the ones who showed up. Private Owen Marsh, a sandy-haired kid from Ohio who had just turned 21, raised his hand. Sarge, what if we're not enough? Laura looked at him for a long moment. Owen was the platoon's medic, quiet, earnest, and so young it almost hurt to look at him. Then we make them work for it, she said simply. We make them fight for every inch, every room, every hallway. We make them remember that they picked a fight with the wrong species. Platoon was quiet. Then one by one they began to nod. The fleet jumped to faster than light travel. 6 hours later, 11 days to Cavath Prime. 11 days of preparation, training, equipment checks, and the quiet private rituals that soldiers perform before battle, writing letters, checking photos, making promises to themselves about what they would do when they got home. Danny Cortez spent most of the journey in the tactical center, studying every scrap of Intelligence they had about the Drari. There wasn't much. He built what models he could, ran simulations, and planned for the worst. Vicky Hale walked the corridors of the fleet, talking to soldiers, checking readiness, and making sure that every unit knew its role. She gave orders and asked questions, and the steadiness in her voice was enough. Nate Sheridan stood on the bridge of the Gallant Ridge and watched the stars streak past and thought about the people they were going to save, people they had never met, from a civilization they had never visited, who had not even asked them to come. 11 days out, the fleet moved through the dark, steady and silent, carrying 10,000 human soldiers toward a war that was not their own. And in his small office on Cavith Prime, Sorvan still sat at his communication terminal, still waiting. He had almost given up hope when on the 9th day, a short message appeared on his screen. It reads, "Signal received. Help is coming." "Hold on." Sorvan stared at the words for a long time, then he pressed his hands to his face and wept. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the Cav system, and the first thing they saw was the wreckage. It was everywhere: twisted metal, shattered hull plates, frozen clouds of gas and debris that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. What had once been the orbital infrastructure of a thriving world, stations, shipyards, satellite networks, defensive platforms, was now a graveyard. Fragments of Valoran ships drifted among the ruins, their elegant swept-wing designs broken and blackened. Here and there, the bodies of the dead floated in the silence, still wearing their uniforms. On the bridge of the Gallant Ridge, Captain Nate Sheridan stood with his hands behind his back and took it all in. His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Beside him, his tactical officer began calling out sensor readings in a steady voice: enemy ship counts, positions, energy signatures. The numbers were not good. The Drakari fleet was spread across the inner system in a loose net with heavy concentrations around Cavith Prime itself. Nate counted over 200 warships of various sizes, plus dozens of troop transports and support vessels in low orbit. On the planet below, the scars of bombardment were visible even from space. Great dark patches where cities had once stood, thin lines of smoke rising into the upper atmosphere. "Contact Commander Jean," Nate said. "Let her know we're here." The communication was patchy. The Drakari had been jamming most frequencies, but they got through. Commander Aleth Jean's face appeared on screen, and Nate could see immediately that she had been through something terrible. Her pale blue skin was smudged with soot and dried blood. Her silver eyes were red-rimmed. Behind her, the bridge of the Saravon was half dark, lit only by emergency lighting. "Human vessel," she said, her voice but controlled. "You should not have come. The battle is lost. I have fewer than 30 ships still operational, and most of those are damaged beyond effective combat capability. The Drakari control the orbitals and the surface. There is nothing you can do here." Nate looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Commander, we didn't come all this way to watch." There was a pause. Aleth stared at him as if she was trying to understand what kind of creature would fly 11 days across the galaxy into a losing war and say something like that with a straight face. "You have 4 cruisers," she said slowly. "The Drakari have over 200 ships. Then I guess we'd better be creative," Nate said. "Stand by." "Commander, we're coming in." He closed the channel and turned to his bridge. Crew, all ships battle stations launch. All fighter wings, cruiser group form. Up on my lead, we're going straight through their screening force and hitting the capital ships in orbit. It was, by any reasonable standard, an insane plan. The Drari outnumbered them catastrophically. A conventional approach would have meant slow, careful, probing attacks from the edge of the system, trying to pick off isolated ships and gradually whittle down the enemy's numbers. That was the textbook approach. It was also exactly what the Drachari would expect. Nate didn't do what people expected. The human fleet surged forward in a tight wedge formation, engines at full power. 4 cruisers, heavy angular ships built for close-range brawling, led the charge. Behind them came the carrier groups, launching wave after wave of fighters and assault shuttles. Formation was aggressive, compact, and moving far too fast for its size. The Drari screening force, a line of fast destroyers and picket ships, moved to intercept. They expected the humans to slow down, to engage at range, to behave like every other species they had fought. Instead, the human cruisers accelerated. They punched through the destroyer line at point-blank range, guns blazing on both sides. 2 Drachari destroyers were torn apart. A third was rammed by the cruiser Iron Hawk and sent spinning into the debris field. Its hull cracked open like an egg. The Drachari had never seen anything like it. Their tactical doctrine was based on superior numbers and firepower. They closed in, surrounded their enemies, and crushed them. But the humans didn't behave like prey. They behaved like something that had decided to be angry. While the cruisers carved a path through the enemy fleet, something even more unexpected was happening. Assault shuttles, small, fast, heavily armored, were racing toward the largest Drachari ship in orbit, a dreadnought called the Varak Thur. It was enormous, nearly 2 km long, bristling with weapons and surrounded by escort ships. It was the command vessel of the Drachari fleet in this sector, and it had never been seriously threatened. Lieutenant Commander Danny Cortez was aboard the lead shuttle. He was in full combat armor, helmet sealed, rifle locked and loaded. Around him sat 24 Marines packed shoulder to shoulder. The cramped troop bay, the shuttle shook and rattled as enemy fire streaked past the hull. 30 seconds to contact. The pilot called back. Danny looked at his Marines. They looked back at him. Some of them were scared. He could see it in their eyes, but they were ready. "Remember your training," Danny said. "Stay tight, watch your corners, and cover each other. We take this ship deck by deck, room by room. No one gets left behind." The shuttle hit the dreadnought's hull with a bone-jarring impact. Breaching charges fired, cutting through the alien armor in a burst of white-hot sparks. The airlock blew open and the Marines poured through. The interior of the Varak Thul was dark and vast, built on a scale that made the humans feel small. The corridors were wide enough for 3 men to walk abreast. The ceilings high and vaulted. The air smelled of metal and something sharp and chemical that none of them recognized. Emergency lighting cast everything in a deep red glow. The Drari crew fought back immediately. They were big ahead, taller than the largest human, broad and heavily muscled, with dark gray skin and 4-fingered hands that gripped their weapons with terrifying strength. In a straight fight, one-on-one, a Drari soldier would have torn a human apart. But the humans didn't fight one-on-one. They fought as a unit. Dai's team moved through the corridors in a flowing, coordinated advance. 2 Marines covering each intersection. Fire teams leapfrogging forward, grenades clearing rooms before anyone stepped through. Door, they communicated constantly, calling out targets, positions, and movements in short, clipped phrases that had been drilled into them through years of training. The Drakari were strong and fierce, but they were used to fighting enemies who broke and ran. The humans did not break, they did not run. When they were pushed back, they regrouped and came again. When they lost a corridor, they found another way around. When their ammunition ran low, they picked up fallen Drakari weapons and kept shooting. Sergeant Laura Beckett squad was assigned to hold a critical junction point, a wide crossroads deep inside the dreadnought where 4 main corridors met. If the Drakari retook this point, they could cut off Dany and LT Unk and GT Y's advance and trap the boarding teams in isolated pockets. Laura planted her squad at the junction and told them they were not moving. The Drakari attacked in waves, first a squad, then a platoon, then what felt like an entire company. They came from 2 directions at once, then 3. Laura's Marines built barricades from torn wall panels and broken equipment. They set up crossfire lanes. They fought with rifles, then sidearms, then knives and fists when the enemy got too close. 3 hours, they held for 3 hours. Laura took a hit to her left arm early on, a glancing energy bolt that burned through her armor and seared the skin. Underneath, she wrapped it with a field bandage and kept fighting. When one of her Marines went down with a leg wound, she dragged him behind cover and propped him up with a rifle so he could still shoot. By the time Dany and LT Unk and GT Y's team reached the Dreadnought's main power core and forced a shutdown, Laura's squad had held the junction against 11 separate assaults. 4 of her 12 Marines were wounded, none were dead. The Varak Thur went dark. Its weapons fell silent. Its engines died. The largest Drakari warship in the Kabeth system was now a floating hulk captured intact by a boarding force of fewer than 200 humans. Across the system on the battered bridge of the Sarah Vaughn, Commander Alith Jean watched the tactical display. Update: the Drakari Dreadnought's icon flickered and changed color from enemy red to neutral gray. Her expression was something between disbelief and the first faint stirring of hope. What are these creatures? She whispered in the High Council chamber beneath the surface of Kaveth Prime. Counselor Dorith received the report. He sat in silence for a long time, his old hands folded on the crystal table, his silver eyes distant. Perhaps, he said softly, to no one in particular. The outcome is not sealed after all. The battle in space had been won, but the war on the ground was a different thing entirely. The Drakari had landed over 50,000 soldiers on Kaveth Prime before the human fleet arrived. They had spread out across the northern continent, seizing cities, destroying infrastructure, and establishing forward bases to support a long-term occupation. Their largest and most heavily fortified position was in Koreth Valley, a wide, flat basin rich in rare minerals, surrounded on 3 sides by jagged mountain ridges. The Drakari had turned it into a fortress. Colonel Vicky Hale stood in the command center of the hastily established joint operations base 30 km south of the valley and studied the holographic terrain map with her arms crossed. The map showed the valley in sharp detail, the enemy base. At its center, the rings of energy. Shields surrounding it, the automated gun imp placements lining the ridges. The armored divisions patrolling the approaches. It was a hard target, maybe the hardest she had ever seen. Commander Alith Jean stood beside her expression grim. The two women had met in person for the first time that morning, and the meeting had been awkward. Alith was taller by a full head, elegant and composed even in her battle-damaged uniform. Vicky was shorter, stockier, and covered in the red dust of Cavath Prime's surface. They had looked at each other the way two predators look at each other across a clearing, with cautious respect and the understanding that they would either work together or fail separately. Our doctrine calls for a precision strike, Alith said, pointing to the map. We identify the shield generators, deploy surgical teams to disable them one at a time, and then use orbital fire to destroy the base from above. It is clean and efficient. How long would that take? Vicky asked. At least 12 days, assuming no complications. We don't have 12 days, Vicky said bluntly. Every day that base stands, the Drakari fly in more reinforcements from off-world. We wait 12 days, we in LT Unk and GT LLB facing twice as many troops. Eighth Silver eyes narrowed. And what does your doctrine call for? Vicky looked at the map. Speed, violence, hit them before they're ready, and don't stop hitting them until it's over. That is not a plan, Alith said coolly. That is a temperament. Vicky almost smiled. Where I come from, that's the same thing. They argued for another 2 hours. It was not a polite argument. Alith thought the humans were reckless and crude. Vicky thought the Valorans were too cautious and too slow, but underneath the friction something was forming. Grudging recognition that each of them had strengths the other lacked. In the end, they built a plan together. It was not purely human and not purely Valoran. It was something new. The assault began at dawn on the third day. Danny Cortez led an armored column of human vehicles, heavy tanks and troop carriers, straight into the mouth of the valley along the main approach road. It was the most obvious attack route, and the Drakari had fortified it heavily. Gun imp placements opened fire as soon as the column came within range. Energy bolts lit up the morning air, slamming into armored hulls and sending plumes of dirt and rocks skyward. Danny knew his role. He was the hammer, loud, visible, impossible to ignore. His job was to draw the bulk of the enemy's attention and firepower toward the front gate, while the real attack came from somewhere else. His vehicle was hit within the first 20 minutes. An energy bolt struck the left side of the troop carrier, blowing out the armor plate and filling the interior with smoke and shrapnel. Dye's driver was killed instantly. Danny pulled himself out through the top hatch, dropped to the ground, grabbed his rifle and kept moving forward on foot. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and his ears rang from the blast. But his legs worked and his hands were steady, and that was enough. Push forward, he shouted into his radio. Keep their eyes on us. While Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's column burned and fought at the front of the valley, Sergeant Laura Beckett was leading a very different kind of operation. 2 days earlier, Valoran geological surveys had identified a network of natural caverns running beneath the eastern ridge of the valley. The caverns were narrow, unstable, and filled with jagged rock formations that made them nearly impossible to navigate with standard equipment. The Valorans had dismissed them as impassable. Laura had looked at the survey data and said, "We can get through." Her team 40 Marines carrying light weapons, breaching charges, and as much ammunition as they could strap to their bodies entered the cavern system before dawn. The darkness was total. They moved by helmet-mounted lights in hand, signal squeezing through passages so tight that they had to remove their chest armor to fit through. The rock was sharp, and within the first hour, every one of them was bleeding from cuts on their arms and shoulders. 3 hours in, they made contact with a Drakari tunnel patrol, a squad of 8 soldiers guarding a natural choke point where the cavern widened into a larger chamber. The fight was short and brutal. In the confined space, there was no room for tactics. It was close quarters work. Rifles at arm's length, then knives, then bare hands. Laura's Marines killed all 8 Drakari, but lost 2 of their own and had 3 more wounded. They kept moving for 14 hours. Laura's team pushed through the caverns. They lost radio contact with the surface. After the first hour, they fought 2 more tunnel patrols. They navigated collapses, flooded sections, and one stretch where the air was so thin that they had to share oxygen from their emergency supplies. At one point, the passage narrowed so much that they had to crawl on their stomachs through cold, wet rock for nearly 100 meters. Laura led from the front the entire time. When her Marines were exhausted, she told them to rest for 5 minutes, then got them moving again. When they were scared, she was calm. When they were in pain, she kept going, and they followed her because that was what you did when Laura Beckett was your sergeant. They emerged behind enemy lines as the sun was setting. The Drari base spread out before them, rows of prefabricated structures, vehicle parks, communication towers, and most importantly, 3 massive shield generators humming with energy. The shields were the only thing protecting the base from orbital bombardment. Without them, the base was exposed. Laura split her team into 3 groups. They hit all 3 generators at the same time. The breaching charges did their work, shaped explosions that cut through the generator housings and detonated the power cores inside. 3 enormous flashes of blue-white light lit up the valley, and the shield dome above the base flickered, shuddered, and collapsed. On the command channel, Laura's voice came through for the first time in 14 hours, crackling with static but clear. "Enough, shields are down, light them up." At the front of the valley, Danny Cortez heard the message and felt something loosen in his chest. He rallied what was left of his column, battered, bleeding, but still fighting, and pushed forward into the base. Behind the lines, Private Owen Marsh was doing what he had trained to do. The young medic moved through the battlefield like a man possessed. He had run out of bandages an hour ago and was tearing strips from his own uniform. He had run out of painkillers and was talking to his patients instead. A steady, gentle stream of reassurance that kept wounded soldiers conscious and calm while he worked. He ran across open ground 3 times to reach fallen soldiers. The ground was swept by enemy fire, and each crossing was a roll of the dice. He reached a wounded Valoran officer, one of Aleth's ground troops who had been hit by an energy blast to the torso, and dragged the alien to cover. The Valoran was twice his weight. Owen didn't care. He applied pressure to the wound, sealed it with the last of his emergency gel, and kept the officer alive until the stretcher teams arrived. He saved 9 lives that day, 5 human, 4 Valorant. On his 10th run across the open ground, an energy bolt caught him in the right shoulder. He went down hard face in the dirt, his arms suddenly numb and useless. He lay there for 10 seconds, breathing hard. Then he pushed himself up with his left hand, pulled his medkit around to his good side, and kept working one-handed. By nightfall, the Drakari base was overrun. The enemy commander, seeing that his position was lost, triggered a scorched earth protocol, a series of buried charges that destroyed the remaining structures and equipment in a chain of massive explosions. The blast wave knocked soldiers off their feet half a kilometer away and sent a column of black smoke into the sky that could be seen from orbit. The Dracharis' hold on Cavith Prime was broken. Their largest ground base was gone. Their shield network was destroyed, and their surviving forces were scattered into the mountains with no supply lines and no reinforcements coming. That night, Vicky Hale and 8th Zarn stood together at the edge of the ruined valley, looking out over the smoldering remains of the enemy base. The sky above them was clear for the first time in weeks. No enemy ships, no bombardment flashes, just stars. Your soldiers, Aleth said quietly, they do not fight the way we expected. Vicky looked at her. How did you expect us to fight? Like everyone else, with calculation, with self-preservation, with the understanding that some battles are not worth the cost. Vicky was quiet for a moment, then she said, we calculate plenty, we just calculate different things. 8th looked at her, waiting. We calculate what happens to the people behind us if we stop, Vicky said, and then we don't stop. Aleth Jean, commander of the Valorant fleet, veteran of 40 years of service, looked at this short, dust-covered human colonel, and for the first time since the war began, allowed herself to believe that they might actually win. Word spread fast. In the days after the fall of Korath Valley, the story raced across the Valoran compact like a signal fire, jumping from hilltop to hilltop. It traveled through military channels. First, coded dispatches detailing the capture of a Drakari dreadnought, the destruction of the enemy's main ground base, the breaking of the siege of Cavith Prime. Then it leaked into civilian networks, and from there it became something bigger than a military report. It became a story, the kind of story that changes the way people think about what is possible. The humans came. That was the part that everyone repeated. The humans came, and they did not stop. On Valorian colony worlds across the sector, people who had been preparing to surrender began to reconsider. On the Compact's allied worlds, governments that had been debating whether to flee or submit sent new messages to each other, cautious at first, then increasingly bold. If these humans could fight like that with 4 cruisers and a handful of Marines, what might happen if they sent more? Earth Central Command was asking itself the same question. Rear Admiral Greg Holloway arrived in the Cavith System 3 weeks after the initial engagement, leading a second task force that was twice the size of the first. Greg was 56, silver-haired and soft-spoken, with a kind of quiet authority that came from 30 years of service and a mind that thought in supply lines, logistics, chains, and long-term strategic arcs. He was not the kind of officer who led Charges, he was the kind who made sure. The officers who led charges had everything they needed to succeed. He met with Captain Nate Sheridan, Colonel Vicky Hale, and Commander Alith Jean aboard the Gallant Ridge, and together they began planning what came next. The situation was this: the Drakari had been pushed back from Kabeth Prime. They still held territory across 7-star systems in the Orion sector, and their main fleet, the bulk of their invasion force, was regrouping in the Thoric Nebula, a dense cloud of gas and dust, about 4 days away at jump speed. If the Drakari were given time to reorganize and resupply, they would come back, and they would come back angry. Greg spread a star chart across the conference table and traced the Drakari supply lines with his finger. They ran like veins through the sector, long, thin chains of cargo ships and fuel depots that connected the Drakari forward bases to their home territory beyond the rim. Cut the supply lines, Greg said, and the forward bases wither. The fleet in the Nebula can't sustain itself without fuel and ammunition. They'll have to pull back or starve. Simple ideas Greg had learned were usually the best ones, because they were the hardest to screw up. Althon fleet engagements, grand battles between formations of warships. The idea of winning a war by attacking cargo ships and fuel depots struck her as almost undignified. But she was learning slowly and sometimes painfully that dignity was a luxury that soldiers at war could not always afford. My ships are fast, she said, faster than yours. We can hit the supply convoys before they know we are there, and my Marines can take the fuel depots, Vicky added. Drop in, blow the tanks, and get out before the response force arrives. Greg nodded. Captain Sheridan's carrier group holds the center and provides cover. We coordinate the strikes so they hit multiple targets at the same time. The Drari won't know where to send their reinforcements. It was a plan that none of them could have made alone. It required valor and speed, human aggression, and the kind of careful, patient coordination that Greg Hall did better than anyone. Over the next 6 weeks, the combined human valor and force executed a campaign of coordinated strikes that tore the Drakari supply network apart piece by piece. Valoran fast cruisers operating in pairs ambushed 17 supply convoys and destroyed or captured over 40 cargo vessels. Human Marine teams hit 4 fuel depots and 2 ammunition dumps. Nate Sheridan's carrier group fought 3 separate engagements against Drakari response forces, winning all 3. The Drakari fought back. Of course, they were not a species that accepted setbacks quietly, but every time they sent a force to protect one supply route, another route was left exposed. Every time they reinforced one depot, another was hit. They were being pulled apart, stretched thin, forced to react instead of act. And for a military built around the simple principle of overwhelming force, being forced to react was something they did not know how to handle. Danny Cortez led 4 of the depot raids personally. On the 3rd raid, his team was ambushed by a Drakari quick reaction force that outnumbered them 3-1. Danny and LT Unk and GT Wise Marines held their ground for 2 hours, destroyed the fuel storage tanks they had come for, and then fought their way to the extraction point through enemy lines. Danny took a piece of shrapnel to his thigh during the retreat and refused medical treatment until every one of his Marines had been evacuated first. Laura Beckett, now promoted to staff sergeant, after Korath Valley, led a long-range reconnaissance patrol deep behind Drakari lines. Her team spent 11 days behind enemy territory, moving at night, hiding during the day, mapping enemy position, and transmitting intelligence back to the fleet. The information she gathered led directly to the destruction of the Drakari's last major supply hub. In the sector, Owen Marsh, his right arm still in a sling from his shoulder wound, volunteered for every medical mission that would have him. He could not carry a rifle, but he could carry a medkit, and that was enough. The Valorian soldiers he had saved at Korath Valley started calling him a word in their own language that roughly translated to the one who does not stop. Owen didn't know what it meant until someone told him, and when they did, he just shrugged and went back to work. On the 43rd day of the campaign, the Drari Dominion made contact for the first time. A transmission arrived on an open channel directed at the combined fleet. The Drari were requesting a ceasefire. The message was received on the bridge of the Gallant Ridge. Nate Sheridan read it, read it again, and then forwarded it to Greg Holloway. Greg read it in his quarters with a cup of coffee in his hand. He set the cup down, sat in silence for a moment, and then opened a channel to Commander Alith. "Gene, they want to talk," he said. "I have read the message," Alith replied. Her voice was steady, but there was something new in it, something that had not been there 6 weeks ago. "I would not have believed this was possible." "It's possible," Greg said. "It was always possible." 3 days later, representatives of the Drari Dominion, the Valoran Compact, and the United Earth Government met aboard a neutral station in deep space. The negotiations were tense and difficult, but the Drari were, for the first time in their history, negotiating from a position of weakness, and they knew it. While the diplomats worked, a memorial ceremony was held on the surface of Kabeth Prime in the ruins of Korath Valley. Soldiers from both species stood together in long, quiet rows. Valorans in their silver dress uniforms, humans in dark blue. A Valoran mourning stone had been placed at the center of the field, its surface carved with the names of the Valoran dead. Beside it, a simple granite marker bore the names of the human soldiers who had fallen. Laura Beckett walked forward from the human ranks. She was in her dress uniform, her red hair pulled back, her face calm and still. In her hand, she held a small earth flag, the blue and green circle on a field of black that humanity had adopted when it went to the stars. She knelt beside the Valoran mourning stone and placed the flag against its base so that it leaned gently against the alien names carved into the rock. She stood, stepped back, and saluted. On the other side of the valley, sitting on the cracked steps of a ruined Valoran temple, Danny Cortez shared a packet of rations with Sorvan. The young diplomat looked different from the frightened man who had sent a desperate signal into the dark all those weeks ago. He looked tired but steady, like someone who had been through something terrible and come out the other side with a clearer sense of the world. "Can I ask you something?" Sorvan said. Danny nodded. "Why did you come?" "Truly, the compact is nothing to Earth. We are not your allies. We are not your kin. Many of my own people laughed at the idea of asking for your help. Why did you come?" Danny chewed his ration bar slowly and looked out at the valley. The scorched earth, the broken machines, the quiet rows of soldiers standing in the Evening light, he thought about the question for a long time, where I come from. He said finally, you don't ignore a cry for help. Sorvan looked at him. Is it really that simple? Danny shrugged. The simple things are usually the truest. They sat together in the fading light, human and alien, eating bad food on the steps of a broken temple, while the stars came out above them, one by one, across the galaxy of Valoran. Journalists stood before a camera in the capital city of Athos, broadcasting live to every world in the compact. Behind her, the sky was clear and the lights of the city were beginning to come back on. For the first time in months, the Drakari Dominion has formally requested a ceasefire, she said. For the first time since the invasion began, the fighting has stopped. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more personal. Many of us believe this war was lost before it began. Many of us believe the outcome was sealed. We were wrong, and we were wrong because we did not account for the one thing that no strategic model, no military analysis, and no probability calculation could have predicted. She turned slightly, and the camera followed her gaze to a group of human and Valoran soldiers standing together at a memorial, their shadows long in the golden light. We did not account for the humans. The broadcast ended. The stars turned slowly overhead, and on 100 worlds across the Orion sector, people looked up at the sky and saw it differently than they had before. Not as a vast and empty darkness, but as a place where somewhere out there someone might answer if you called for help. The outcome had been sealed until it wasn't.